Welcome, everybody. Good morning. We are excited to be with you today. Like all of you, our training has pivoted to a new version online, significantly shortened. This used to be an all-day in-person training, which we look forward to doing that again sometime. But we're happy to be able to offer this to more people at less expense. So I'm Catherine Webb Martinez. I am Associate Director of Program Planning and Evaluation, and I'm a co-lead for this training with my colleague Vikram, who will introduce himself in just a moment. We have three wonderful panelists for you. We'll have them introduce themselves when we get to the panel portion of the agenda. Vikram?
Hi, good morning all. I am Vikram Kaundinya. I am a CE specialist. My expertise is program evaluation. I am on campus at UC Davis in the Department of Human Ecology. Thank you.
Great. All right, so for today, I'm going to quickly review what we're going to be covering, and then we'll get into our how-to needs assessment presentation. Vikram will go over content, and I have collected over the years a number of cooperative extension examples to share with you. These are from predominantly advisors who aren't able to be with us today, but I will share their notes, what they've shared with me. We'll take a quick break, and don't forget to come back, because one of participants' favorite things is always the panel. So we'll have a panel discussion, presentation, and time for Q&A after each of those. Then we're going to put you into some small group breakout rooms, and we've organized those programmatically, so you'll be with folks who work in a similar program area. And then we'll come back together for a quick report out and wrap up. The anticipated outcomes for today are understanding the basics, what, why, how, when. Also, we're going to spend some time on questions, how to write good needs assessment questions. And then we've been spending more time over the last few years having discussion about how do you use the findings once you have them to inform how you develop and focus your program. And by the end of it, we're hoping that you will have identified at least a next step, or if this is a real beginning of the process for you, a sense of the approach that you're going to take for your needs assessment. So with that, I will turn it over to Vikram.
Okay. So as Catherine said, first we'll see what, how, when, these kind of things, and then we'll get into specific examples. So needs assessment actually informs the overall program planning. So it is the very first step in program planning. And it's driven by the question, what do your clients need and how can those needs be met? So it kind of covers like collecting the needs, like the data, and then also prioritizing and then utilizing them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll just quickly look at a couple of approaches. The traditional needs assessment approach, where we'll ask the participants or your clientele what do they need. And then there is this asset-based needs assessment approach, where you are focusing more on identifying what is available, already available or potentially available to a community. This asset-based needs assessment approach helps to identify the skills that are available, like organizational, agency, community, fiscal. So in this approach, you can focus both on the needs and assets. It's like more of a participatory approach where you divide the group into two, and one will focus and talk and discuss about assets, and the other one will talk and discuss about the needs. So this is like a more of a qualitative approach. So that is also one of the things that is coming up where you can identify both. Next slide, please.
Sorry, there we go.
Okay, so you will talk about this.
I wanted to share this example of some questions from an asset-based approach. This was a county level needs assessment done a while ago in Sacramento County. It was to identify the issues and how important they were to members of the community. That's the first set of questions up here. And then you can see they had, this is just an excerpt, there was a longer list. And the issues actually that they put here, they should look familiar. They were areas that we have expertise in. And then there was a whole other set of questions around community assets, and they asked folks to rate these features in their community.
So we'll see when to conduct a needs assessment. When the program is brand new, when you are launching the program, then you want to know the needs so that the program is needs based. And also you can do it like when you are new to the job, when you don't know much about that area where you are operating. And also you want to learn more about what your clients need related to a specific condition, like you know that this is an issue that you want to know more about it. You can conduct a needs assessment. And also when you need to document the needs in that area for funding purposes, this is helpful. And also you need additional information to communicate with your stakeholders. The stakeholders can be like the donors or the advisory boards, anyone. If they want more information about something, then we can conduct a needs assessment. And if the program evaluation focus of any program is on how well it meets the needs of the intended audience, this is helpful. Next slide, please. And why do needs assessment? Like we'll see like some potential uses. It's definitely, as we discussed, for developing your program from goal setting to evaluation, like the outcome evaluation, and for performance appraisal. And this needs assessment study can be at a collaborative, statewide or regional level. We'll present an example after this. It can be a commission study. We have an example for this also. This can be turned into a journal article. And also, as we discussed, like to justify requests for funding. And also this can be for research purposes. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I just said, like let us see some benefits of collaborative needs assessment. So if you do it in a collaborative approach, then there's a better understanding of needs at a bigger picture or a regional level. You can leverage subject matter expertise. Then the same thing with limited resources, you can leverage those. And if there are shared goals, that can be addressed more efficiently through a collaborative approach. And such an approach can serve as a strategic planning tool for other program areas also. And we'll see an example. So this is a very recent one. It is just concluded. This is from the agronomy program team. So they are conducting a state level California growers needs assessment with the main purpose of generating statewide understanding of goals and common challenges faced by growers who manage agronomic crops in the state. So this is a team of all the advisors and specialists from different parts of the state. And the target audience to which an online Qualtrics survey was sent out were all the agronomic crops growers, crop consultants, and then also some allied industry. The benefits from this, what we are expecting is it will support the regional and statewide research and extension efforts. Like when we get to the prioritization stage, we are hoping that it will support with that purpose. And the current outputs that are planned are, this will be turned into policy briefs. These will be presented at conferences and meetings. And also there's a plan to write peer-reviewed manuscripts for peer-reviewed journals. So that will be the utilization part. Next slide, please. And if you are a new advisor, then the first steps for you to take in order to process the needs are find out what is already known or available, like there's already some secondary data, like form of reports that is existing there, and also the exit report of your predecessor. So all that can also be used as valuable data. And then get out and introduce yourself because until you go and talk with people you don't know, like you can know some additional things. And then develop relationships with all the stakeholders, like developing relationships is also like really essential for extension and in order to identify the need. And clearly define your clientele, because that is also important because it can be too broad sometimes. So clearly define your clientele and then get the lay of the land. So this will inform who and what to ask about needs. Next slide, please. And then this is like a 3 phases of needs assessment process from one of the extension handbooks at University of Tennessee. There are some other ways also, but overall, in a nutshell, phase one includes exploration, like that's where you are defining what's the purpose of your need assessment, what could be the potential users, who are your audience, and are there any needs that have been identified and existing there, like the secondary data sources, and then the methods like what and how to collect. And the second phase after that, it is like gathering the data, right? Like implementing the needs assessment plan, and then kind of having a participatory discussion approach to synthesize everything. And then the last phase is utilization, where you use the data to set the program priorities. Catherine will talk about this later, like some program priorities, some criteria, and then develop an action plan. Once you have identified the needs and prioritize them, then identify an action plan, and then definitely communicate the results. Because without utilization part, needs assessment process is not complete until the results are shared and utilized. Next slide, please.
So I just wanted to briefly address the situation that most of us are in. I know some of our more northern counties aren't quite as in shelter in place as the rest of us. And so in this virtual reality, we had a discussion with our panelists about, how does this impact the way we approach needs assessment? And actually, there's not a huge constraint. Obviously, building relationships is challenged. And as Vikram just said, that's critical, especially for new advisors. But there's a lot of opportunities to still meet socially distanced, like if you are able to do farm calls, those sorts of things. Obviously, 4-H isn't able to get all of their kids together, so it depends on your program area. We talked about, you can still do a lot of the methods that we'll be going over in greater detail. Interviews can, are often by phone or can be by Zoom now. Typically, most of our surveys are online, although some clientele do better with mailed surveys, and that would still work fine in the virtual reality. And then we learned that a lot of commodity meetings, for example, are now online, and there's other forums that are now online, and it's actually easier for some of our advisors to join those because there isn't as much travel, et cetera, to get there. So we want to be thinking about our current situation, but most of what we're going to share with you would be working just fine right now. So we're going to move on to looking at some of those commonly used data collection methods for needs assessment. Vikram?
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So we are going to focus on the methods that are commonly used in extension. Based on our experience, there are some other methods also out there. So if there is any study that needs like another method, we can talk afterwards. We are always available. But these are the ones that we have found to be commonly used in extension based on our experience. So as I've been talking about the secondary data, like where the data that's already existing in the form of reports and already collected, and then there is this there are these methods to collect primary data directly from the respondents. Next slide, please. So in the secondary data collection methods, the one that's commonly used is document review, the literature review. So it's basically like the content analysis of existing reports or any other existing information. So in this method, like there is the little to no participant burden. The participant burden, the little extent comes when you have identified what's the needs in the secondary data that shows, and then take a participatory approach to discuss with your stakeholders and then prioritize. So that's where the little burden comes. So some of the best practices that I have found is to have an audit trail of how you are doing it. And then system analysis and documentation is really important. I'll just show an example. Next slide, please. Yeah.
So I'm going to share an example from Natalie Price. This is when she began as an NFCS advisor, and she used mixed methods, which is common. We wanted to highlight, though, the document review that she did. She looked at the county health improvement plan. She looked at community health center needs assessments, other needs assessments that had been done in her community. She looked at relevant health data and policy reports, and that then informed her questions and discussions with key partners and A&R academics. She then talked to advisors and specialists and statewide program directors and key community informants as well. Moving on now to, yep.
So one of the commonly used methods in extension is individual interviews. So we can use this method when personal contact is desirable or your clientele group is smaller, so you can spend time talking with each of them. And you can also use this when the group is unlikely to respond to a written survey. Like we all know that there is this survey fatigue. So when you think that the response rate, the people responding will not be like good, then you can adopt this method. And also sometimes the sample, your clientele has people that are incapable of taking a survey due to like literacy levels or whatever the other conditions can be, then you have to interview them. And also you can use this when you are not sure what is most important to potential respondents, you are not still at a stage to write the questions, then you can do some individual interviews. And if you choose to adopt this method, some best practices are state the purpose up front, be very clear about your goal, like why you are talking with them. So it will be very efficient in terms of time and also to get like valid data. And be consistent and neutral with all the respondents, like have the same questions and ask them in a neutral manner. So don't lead the respondents to a certain type of an answer, but you can always use some probes. That's always good. And then some other best practices are like don't give your opinions and avoid words such as okay, correct, right, or don't agree or disagree with anything. And also like my experience has been like there are always some chatty people who want to drag you into giving an opinion. So we have to kind of not do that. Uh, and then the other thing that I have found very helpful is to send the questions 1 or 2 days in advance to the people so that they know that like what you're asking and can be better prepared. So this may work in some cases. Now Catherine will present an
Yes.
example.
This is from a more seasoned advisor, Elizabeth Fitchner, and what she found to really work well was piggybacking, using informal interviews, piggybacking on grower and processor group existing meetings. She felt that way she would have direct contact with individuals, these are her words, who have their finger on the pulse of industry issues. And so she found that by doing them at the meetings, she found out more what were the issues at the industry level versus during farm calls, it would be more individual growers' issues. She also chose this approach instead of a one size fits all survey. She said, recommended, really thinking about your demographics. She has multiple commodities like many of you, and they have different and not overlapping demographics. For example, she's got, almond and pistachio clientele and their land managers and PCAs and not the growers, but then she has walnut and olive clientele who are the growers. So for her, going to these meetings and doing informal interviews made the most sense. She also liked this approach because it was a convenient sample and it reduced participant burden because they were already there.
So the next type of interview is a group interview. We call them focus group interviews. And these are also, as most of you may know, very commonly used in extension. And again, this can be used when you don't know what questions to ask yet, or you want to know more from a survey responses, like you send out a survey, there's a huge response and there's a lot of data. Then you want to know from a representative sample of your survey participants, what exactly they meant. You can adopt this method. And then also when you want to foster trust and relationship building, these group interviews are good. And then piggyback of existing meetings, you can use this. And then if you want to understand common issues or needs of a group, then you can adopt it. If you choose to use this method, some best practices are that I have found that around 10 people will be good for a 1 to 1.5 hour interview. And then explain the rules, because not everyone may know these rules. So the basic things like one person talking at a time and be respectful of everyone's opinion. It's only like different opinions people are differing on. It's nothing personal, those kind of things. And also I make like deliberate efforts to get answers from everyone, in the sense that I try to involve everyone, but do not kind of force them to answer everything, because it's okay if not everyone answers every question. So I've given a YouTube video link below, like we'll share this PowerPoint. So I offered a training to some of the students here on campus on some best practices. And we also have a handout that we'll share after the training, like best practices of conducting focus group interviews. Now we'll have an example.
And I think I would just add, Vikram, that obviously now many of us can't do in-person focus groups. There are a lot of resources that we're compiling and we're posting about doing virtual focus groups. So happy to talk.
Yeah, and also like, yeah, just like because Catherine brought that point up, just a few things to consider if you want to do an online focus group. We'll share an example from Journal of Extension. A professor at University of Florida published her experiences. So obviously it can reach out to many people. Like if it's like they are situated at different parts of a place, then it's easy for attending. But the things that we have to consider in advance are how will we manage any technology issues or like the internet and those kind of things. And also that article, she points out that it will not be possible to see the visual cues. So you have to be kind of thinking more about that also when we are kind of conducting an online focus group. Yeah.
Thanks, Vikram.
And the other one, which I have used not a lot.
Sorry, Vikram, I thought I skipped a slide. Go ahead.
So you have an example? Okay. Okay, so the key informant interviews is like collecting information to just clarify things after some activity has been done from a few people who have a lot of experience in the community. Like for example, well, if you do a needs assessment, people will often identify their wants also to just verify the collected data in order to prioritize the needs. You can talk with some people who have been staying in the community, who have some experience and that kind of a thing. And also to get inputs from knowledgeable and influential people in the society, you can do this. And also to explore any unanticipated ideas, you can do this. Unlike focus groups where it is a best practices to have a homogeneous group, like people having a common need or something. This one, you can select the key informants from a mix of people of different ages, races, ethnicities, etc. And again, I have found like if you interview 10 people, that should be sufficient. Next slide, please.
So we want to share an example from Ramiro Lobo, a small farms advisor, and Jan Gonzalez, a community education specialist down in San Diego County. And they also use mixed methods, including a survey and key informant interviews, but we wanted to highlight the focus groups. This was really a larger collaborative county level needs assessment that they did, working with county departments like Ag, Weight and Measures, and the Planning Department and Environmental Health. They also worked with the Farm Bureau and our UC SAREP program and a number of industry partners. And what's interesting to note here is that the focus groups were organized by the different sectors of industry to help further understand those specific organizational needs. I thought I would just mention how they use this, given the partnership with the county. So of course, like we would use it for our own work, it guided the development and implementation of their research and education programs in UC Cooperative Extension San Diego County. And then the county partners and other community organizations used it as a foundation for their strategic communications and as a guide to local policy decisions to benefit not only the farming community, that was sort of the focus, but also other public and private stakeholders that were invested in the local food system there. So maybe you don't have to organize the focus group. All right, next slide.
Okay, the next method is observation, where you go to the field and observe the practice or behavior. And this can be adopted when you want and listen what people have to say, or you recommended some practice and you want to observe or whatever. And then to confirm the fidelity of implementation, you can do this. If you want to adopt this method, then have an observation guide. It's always better to have like some kind of focused observation and then field notes. We'll present an example. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is an example from a program that I observed at Elkus Ranch a couple of years back. And then I developed these observation prompts along with the team. The team came up with all these. They told me that what I should be observing. And so this is always helpful in systematically focusing the observation. Yeah, next slide, please. And then the last method, the most commonly used method is surveys. This can be used to collect standardized information from a large sample. And also the privacy, like when privacy is important or independent opinions like anonymous confidential responses are needed, this can be a useful method. And when there are resource constraints, mainly time and money, you can use like online Qualtrics survey. UCNR has it available for all of us. And then again, some best practices, as I said, like in any method, be very clear about the purpose, like even before the first question, briefly give an introduction, what's the purpose of the study and how you use this data, and be focused and ask only questions that you need, not the questions that can be used for some other purposes. And also establish reliability and validity of the survey questionnaire, meaning like you do a pilot test to know like if all the questions are being understood easily by uh, respondents, and also have it reviewed by some other experts so that they know that you're asking the questions that will give you the data that's needed. And also follow some basic design principles. Like we're offering a training on surveys in a couple of weeks from now. So we'll go into more depth in that one. Next slide, please.
I want to share an example from Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. She's a farm advisor in the Delta. She also used mixed methods, and this was a new position, and there's lots of crops in the Delta. So she did start with a document review looking at Ag Commissioner crop report data. She needed to sort of figure out what the top crops were by acreage in order to help her prioritize her efforts. And she has found that using a survey, the clickers, I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. Many county offices have a set that you can borrow, and our statewide programs as well. You might have used them in your college classes. She also used informal interviews, and those last two methods, she used them on an ongoing basis. The clickers in particular, she likes because she gets immediate feedback asking needs assessment questions. They really engage the audience, and it just provides her this ongoing understanding of what the critical needs are for her clientele. The lessons learned that she shared with me is that she really did think that using mixed methods helped her learn the breadth of the needs, and then it's up to her to prioritize which ones to address. We'll talk more about prioritizing later. So I'm going to go over a couple quick slides here. Obviously, living and working in the state of California, there's a lot of diversity, and in everything we do, we try to approach it in a culturally responsive way. So this is just a quick reminder to use that same thinking and lens when you're designing and conducting your needs assessment. I like this quote from the American Evaluation Association, which Vikram and I and others are part of. This is the process where we're constantly learning, unlearning, and relearning. So a couple tips that I compiled from the AEA blogs are, like in evaluation in other areas, consider working with your stakeholders as you're developing your needs assessment. They can help you determine which approach might be the most appropriate, help you make sure your questions are relevant and make sense. Again, most of you are scientists. We ask a lot of questions. That's useful in trying to develop something that's the most culturally responsive as possible. I think one of the biggest things is practicing self-reflection, being aware of our own attitudes and biases and perceptions that may affect how we not only approach the needs assessment, but how we understand the findings. And then just a quick point that secondary data sometimes may miss marginalized groups. So thinking about that and maybe what different community organizations that work with underrepresented groups, to consider reaching out to them if you're concerned that they're not being represented in any secondary data that you're looking at. Oh, it's because I'm not in show mode. I gave away the answer. I forgot about that. I'm gonna have to go into show mode. I wanted to see you all. Anyway, I was gonna have you put answers in the chat. So some considerations, how might participant characteristics affect your needs assessment? Some are pretty obvious, like language. We deal a lot with needing to translate things at UCCE. Some other things may be less obvious and are worth thinking about. I thought I would just share kind of in this area of communication styles and family relationships. I heard from a seasoned advisor a while ago about a situation that he had seen happen over the years working with white male growers, particularly fathers and sons. and that if he had them answering a question together, often the son wouldn't really speak up what they thought because of the way the family dynamics were. So there's just a lot of nuances, obviously, with working with different people. We also wanted to share this example from Margaret Lloyd. She's a small farms advisor, and when she started, her approach was to just get in her car and drive around and stop at every farm she saw. She created a Google map, and she would stop, and she developed this survey to work. These are the men growers. That's a big clientele group for her. And she developed this written survey, but she realized it didn't really work. She couldn't just show up and give them this survey to fill out. That for them, it was more about relationships and observations and conversations. So she ended up adapting it to be more of an interview protocol. And that enabled her at these visits to be able to ask the same questions, collect the same data, and she created her own database. She really felt like this worked well. She's planning on doing it every few years. She thought it was important for building relationships, which is something new advisors focus on doing. It was useful for getting updated contact information. And then she mentioned she might try it at different times of the year, thinking that different things might come up as seasonally there are different issues for the growers. I'm going into show mode because I don't want to, oh no. Maybe I'm not. Sorry guys, I apologize. Here, we'll go through this first.
Okay, so we'll see briefly about how, like some guidelines for writing good questions, survey questions, or any needs assessment questions. I will give this as a handout. The number one guideline is make the question very simple, short, and direct. We'll see some examples in the handout. And phrase the question in a way that they can be understood by every respondent to whom you are going to send out the survey. And do not use any abbreviations, slang, or acronyms, even though they may appear to be very common and easily understood. Don't use that. And then phrase the questions so as to elicit unambiguous answers. Quantify the responses whenever possible. Then yes, next slide, please. And do not phrase the questions so that they can lead to any bias that may predetermine a respondent's answer. Avoid questions that might lead to unstated assumptions. As again, I said, like we'll provide a handout with some examples and an answer key, and we'll go into more detail in the later trainings. And avoid leading questions which may imply a desired response. And also avoid questions that may elicit embarrassment, suspicion, or hostility, like asking some sensitive information. Next slide, please. And avoid double-barreled questions. This is one of the common mistakes I find literally in every survey that I'm asked to review, like asking about two different things in the same question. Then the next guideline is make sure the alternatives you are giving are all exhaustive. And if you're not sure about it, then always have another option with a text box where the people can give their answer. And the next one is make sure respondents have the enough like necessary information to answer the questions. Don't assume that they may be knowing about anything. Like if you ask about a policy or a plan or something, just give a line or two about what that is. And then have equal variation, like if you're using a rating scale, like have equal variation on both the sides, like disagree, agree, or negative, positive, those kind of things. Next slide, please. And also ensure that the question stem matches the answer choices. This is also some like a thing that issue I find in quite a few surveys. The question doesn't match the answer choices. And then decide the points on the scale based on the purpose. By this, what I mean is like, do you want to have a 5-point or a 6-point scale? Like some people say, if you're measuring attitudes, then it is okay to give a neutral choice. And some people say that, okay, it's not like that. It's directional, attitudes are directional. So it has to be either way, like one way or the other. And then give a time frame range whenever necessary. When you're asking in the past, it's always good to give like 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. Yeah, next slide, please. So here, like as I said, like we'll give a handout with the answer key that addresses all these guidelines. But I pulled out 4 questions here that I see like commonly the mistakes are in these questions, the common mistakes. So I've highlighted this. We'll go more into depth in the survey training, but I'll just read it and I'll just say what I see as the issues with this. The first question, many farmers in Fresno County are using nonpareil more than any other variety of almond. Do you use nonpareil? So the issue I see with this question is that you are kind of leading people like, if you say that most of the other people are using that, there is a pressure to kind of say yes for this. And then the second one is, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statements? My farm is a leader and innovator in the county for the best IPM practices. As I said, that this is one of the common mistakes. You're asking two things, to like a double barrel, a leader and an innovator. And if the answers are different for each of them, then the data validity will not be good. And then the next one, to what extent do you utilize nutrition information from UCANR, NFCS advisors to inform food purchase decisions? The answer choices are yes, somewhat no. So the issues I see, like they're using acronyms, which may not be understood by everyone. And then the answer choices do not clearly match with this question. And then, do you think the proposed plan to expand the role of 4-H volunteers in Half Moon Bay community is good? So as I said, the issue with this is not everyone may know what the plan is. So maybe you want to give a line or sentence or two sentences about the salient things about the plan, and then ask the question. Next question. Next.
All right, so the next few slides, I'm going to talk about using your needs assessment findings to help you develop your program. So this comes into where you'll be priority setting. Sometimes in your needs assessment questions, you may be asking your clientele to prioritize or rate how important certain or serious certain issues are for them. But that's not the only thing to consider. We also want to consider some other filters and criteria as you decide what you should be prioritizing, because we can't be everything for everyone, as you well know. So I'm going to go over these, and I'd just like for you to put in the chat what you think is most pertinent for you. So a number of things to consider, obviously, is your job description, focusing on what's been identified there, your personal expertise, the collaborations that you have that are working really well, how you can leverage those to help further your program and realize outcomes, and what resources, obviously, that are available to you. Organizationally, it's good to think about our ANR strategic vision, our public values and the condition changes, and sort of our comparative advantage as an organization. Are other organizations in the community addressing those needs already? What can you do that's different or more unique if needed? Clientele, obviously we want to think about, and that's where the needs assessment data probably hits home the most, is they're identifying what's most important to them. And it might not just be your clientele, but perhaps other partners or stakeholders, and thinking about the extent and frequency of that problem for them. Then there's this bucket that we call the solution. You know, what's the state of science to address a particular need or issue? What's the probability of you being successful in finding a resolution? And is it going to be economically feasible? What's your potential for impact? So again, just to sort of wrap up and put this in the context of developing your program, many of you are probably familiar with a logic model. It's a simple graphic to think about how you design and implement your program, but your needs assessment, as you can see, is over here on the left. It's where you assess the needs and perhaps the assets in the community. Then you are prioritizing based on the things that we were just discussing. And I want to highlight really thinking about these intended outcomes at the end of the logic model. You know, what are the outcomes that you're identifying that you can make a change on and really measure? And how do those then connect to what research is showing as contributing to these longer term condition changes? So again, this is putting in the context of how you use your needs assessment throughout developing your program. So with that, we are gonna, yep.
Catherine, I had a quick point to make just before everyone breaks, really short. So I just wanted to clarify, like, in sense, just tell to people that maybe new, like by mixed methods, we mean both qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative more like surveys using the rating scale where you ask these questions and assign a number or a code to that. And qualitative is all the observations, interviews. So it's always the recommended practice to use like more than one method, multiple methods, and also if you can use mixed methods, both qualitative and quantitative, that's really good. Yeah.
Thanks, Vikram. All right,
Yeah.
we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:47. Thanks, folks. All right, by my clock, I show that it's 10:47. So if we can reconvene after our short break. I'm excited to introduce our needs assessment panel, and each of these advisors will introduce themselves and share with you their experience and overall approach to doing needs assessment in their work. I believe, Stephen, you are up first.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this needs assessment training. We have a couple of examples. I'm going to do one that's from my work starting as a 4-H advisor in Sonoma, Marin, and Nampa counties. I can't believe it's been 4 years already, but my program is still being guided by that work that I did when I started. So I started my position in May of 2016. And the needs assessment process took about 8 months from soup to nuts. So it can take a while. The first thing I did was start to develop my clientele groups. And this was both as it was listed in my position vacancy announcement and by talking to other colleagues in this disciplinary area.
I'm not able to hear anything.
Am I still coming through?
Yes.
Okay. And so divided my clientele into sort of 3 groups. One was the internal 4-H, if you can go back a slide, internal 4-H community, so county director 4-H staff, existing 4-H youth members, volunteers, youth that were not being served by our 4-H program, so more of an external audience, and then staff and organizations providing youth services for youth development or STEM education. And that helped then target my needs assessment to those 3 clientele groups. So next slide. I focused on a couple of different data sources in a couple approaches. So one was looking at secondary data, and I looked up US Census, school enrollment data, decades of 4-H enrollment, other strategic plans or other documents like the County Department of Health and Human Services in my 3 counties had states of the county types of reports. There were other demographic trend reports, etc. So a lot of secondary data I was able to review. And I didn't use a rigorous sort of content analysis or thematic analysis approach for those, but it did help guide me in sort of narrowing which will come later in terms of making program priorities. I focused on building relationships within the broader community, and I did this using interviews, so semi-structured interviews with key stakeholders. And I just did cold emails to directors of Boys and Girls Club and YMCA and other youth-serving agencies. Most were pretty receptive. I got a pretty high response rate on my cold call emails, maybe 60%, 50-60%. And it was great for me to be able to build those relationships as well as getting information to guide my program. And then focus was better understanding the state of the existing program, and that was that internal stakeholder. And for those, I did a lot of participant observations of 4-H meetings, events, summer camp, using sort of participant observation and observational notes. So next slide. And so after collecting and looking through the secondary data, the semi-structured interviews, looking for patterns in those interviews and what were commonalities or what emerged as sort of key items across interviews, and looking at participant observations, identified emergent themes. So what were the needs for those different clientele groups? And that then I filtered through our A&R Healthy Families and Communities plan, because there were some priorities outlined in that plan. I filtered it through our 4-H mission mandates, And then I also filtered it through my own expertise. And so I give an example of, there was a need that arose in one of my 3 counties about 3rd grade literacy and really wanting to bolster sort of literacy practices of kindergarten through 3rd graders to improve that. So it rose as an emergent need from my key interview stakeholder groups, but it's not a key mission in 4-H or our A&R strategic plan. And I don't have, my expertise is STEM and science education. And so it didn't align with my expertise either. So I had to sort of let that one go, and that wouldn't be a priority that I focused on. So that, I think through that process, I was able to identify a couple of key emergent needs that both I could contribute to because I had expertise. It also was backed by the organization, and it came up in my communities. And that was somewhat of an iterative process. But I give that example that just because it emerges as a need doesn't necessarily mean you have to focus on it, because you need to find a few, I would say, fewer things that you can move the needle on rather than a larger swath of things. And then my results there were those 3 clientele groups and sort of long range goals for each. So for those youth that weren't being served with 4-H or marginalized youth, looked at ways to provide more culturally relevant programs. And we started a whole series of new programs, particularly in Santa Rosa and the Roseland neighborhoods, to serve youth that hadn't been reached with 4-H before. For our internal group, it was about strengthening our competence. So that was more of the extension in offering trainings and workshops for staff and volunteers to improve their practices. And then for the internal 4-H youth and volunteers, looking at and developing a series of activities about how to improve program quality that would then lead to higher and better youth development outcomes. Okay, and then finally, just some takeaways that I'd recommend to everyone. One is your fellow advisors in a similar or same disciplinary area will be of great help and assistance. So definitely talk with your colleagues. I'd recommend treating your needs assessment as both a process to direct your program, your priorities, but also building relationships at the same time. No reason it can't be both. And then pick one of 2 routes. And I've done both of these throughout my time in A&R. So A, either treat it as a research project, go through IRB, get human subject approval, undertake a rigorous data collection analysis, and get it published. And I did that when I was working in the A&R building as the STEM coordinator, and we did a pretty rigorous needs assessment of science education in our system, and we published that in Journal of Extension. When I came as my advisor job, I followed more of the path of B, is that I used my needs assessment process to point my program in a productive direction, but I got it done in a timely manner and then got on with doing extension and research programming. So I didn't publish the results from my needs assessment as an advisor like I did as a needs assessment as an academic coordinator. So yeah, pick one. And there's been some other advisors, colleagues that have decided to go route A and try to do 3 formal rigorous needs assessments at the same time. And I think that's a little ambitious. But I'd say, maybe pathway A if there's a gap in your disciplinary area or field that a needs assessment could contribute to. But otherwise, think strategically about what the purpose is, and then sort of follow that path. And oftentimes route B might be more productive to starting to get work done in a productive way. Okay, thank you. I think I talked within my allotted time.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Quite timely of you. We want to take some time now to answer any questions that folks have. I know people have bandwidth issues, but if you don't, it would be great for you to turn on your video and verbally ask the question. Nice to get to know each other. There's a lot of new people, or we'll be monitoring the chat too, if that works better for your Wi-Fi situation. Questions for Stephen? Or any questions so far? Give it a minute.
I have a question.
Great.
So IRB, how do you get started with IRB? Is there a place, a page that you can go to learn more about, when I'm going to be designing my questions, how am I expected to design the questions? What paperwork do I need to file? What am I allowed to do, not allowed to do? Like, where do I get that information ahead of time?
On our resources page that we'll be sharing later, I'm going to kick it over to Vikram here, but he worked with Kit Alviz in my office to develop a list of where to go and what trainings. So we can show you where that page is. Vikram, do you want to add to that?
You're muted.
So that's pretty much what I wanted to share. There is a page where you start the application, and also if you haven't completed the training, you need to complete a training like a social research kind of handling human subjects research. So I'll share both those links, and it goes through the UC Davis IRB, and they have a phone number. We have given that also in there. So if you have any questions about anything, they're like they answer very quickly.
Great. It looks like Kit put in the link to the IRB webpage that I was mentioning.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and that city training is long. It's like 6 or 8 hours, but it's good for a couple of years before you have to take the refresher.
Yeah.
And then submitting the application we go through UC Davis's IRB. There's several components. There's an application component, and you got to attach copies of your data instruments, whether it's interview questions or a survey. For the most part, I think most of our needs assessments would likely be considered exempt, if not even class. A lot of my work comes back as classified as not human subjects research, so it doesn't need review by IRB. But it just depends on sort of the nature of the sort of what you're proposing to do and the types of questions you're asking. But a lot of the questions in needs assessment are not going to be sensitive or potentially, damaging to people that respond, but that might depend on what you're asking.
So do you have to do the city training even if they come back and say, yeah, we don't need IRB clearance for this?
Yes.
In order to submit an application,
You have to go
one of the
through-
first things
okay.
they check. Yeah, but if you can always, you might talk with, I'm happy to talk, or maybe Kit or others, just to see if the type of thing that consult with people before putting in time to put together an application and submitting it, right? Because usually you don't have to submit an IRB application if it's formative data. So you're only using the data to improve programs, make priorities. It's only considered human subjects research typically when you're going to use it to contribute to the scholarly field through conference presentations or scholarly manuscripts.
What about publishing the
Or
results?
publishing.
Yeah, so I would have to do it if I wanted to publish the results. And what about when you start designing in Qualtrics, you start designing, okay, these are my questions and this is what I want to do. Is there someone that can look over it before you actually, send this out to say, like, to give feedback? Is there someone in UCNR that is known for that can give the feedback of, you might want to reword this question, or this one, seems misleading, or, sometimes you don't catch everything when you're the one actually writing the questions.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and Kit and I can do that too. Often the three of us will work together. So any one of us can provide that feedback. It is good also, even before or after you work with us, to run it by colleagues or stakeholders, clientele that you work with also. So a couple different passes and different perspectives is helpful.
Okay.
Any other questions at this point? Maybe the last thing I would say on IRB is we have been hearing since the Davis process has gotten better over the last couple of years, I feel like more and more people are going through IRB just so that they can publish. I know Vikram tells the story of, right? You can tell your story, Vikram, of not getting it and then needing to get it.
Yeah, so we did a study. It was not like a needs assessment, but some other study where we thought it was not like going to be a significant one. So We thought that maybe we'll share it at meetings, the results at conferences, but the intention, if it is not to contribute to the existing knowledge base, in terms of peer-reviewed publication, we didn't need an IRB. But then when we got the results back, we found that there was some really significant results that we felt could be shared and can contribute to the existing knowledge base. Then we had to go back to IRB and retrospectively get that done. So from then I've been just getting IRB for every study that I do because we never know.
Great, good question. IRB is always a hot topic.
Quick question again, IRB. So when you submit that application, what is the turnaround time? How much time should I be factoring in before I can send out my questionnaires?
I've got them like within 10 days once,
Okay.
and also like maybe 2 to 3 weeks is the maximum in my experience here at UC Davis. But I think you can also request them, you can send an email and tell that like I'm doing this in the next 10 days if you can, and they help me with that.
And you have to get a response from IRB before you can send out the questionnaire?
Yeah, it has to be approved,
Okay,
like approved or exempt or whatever, the action has to be taken.
okay. Good to
Great,
know.
thanks for your question, Cindy. I'm going to go ahead and move us along to Davy Rao. Davy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me today. So my name is Davy Rao, and I am the Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor for San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the needs assessment, well, a couple of needs assessments that I've been working on. So I started here with UC Cooperative Extension in February of 2015. And I did my first needs assessment interview about 4 months later, in June 2015. And if you want to go to the next slide, I know Fadzai is on the call, and she was sort of my inspiration for my needs assessment. And we actually did some work together on our needs assessment. So Fadzai started, I don't know, I think a couple years before I did, and she had already conducted her needs assessment. And so, and she's a livestock and natural resources advisor as well. And so I basically took her needs assessment. I figured she had already done it. Probably, we have very similar clientele. And so I took her needs assessment questions. I modified a couple of them, and I added several additional questions as well. And so this, what you're looking at here, is a poster that Fadzai and I put together and presented at a Society for Range Management conference with some preliminary results from our needs assessment. And so the process that we used, or that I used in my portion of it, was that I did in-person interviews. So for me as a new advisor, I was really interested in making connections with my clientele and doing it in person. And I know that that's really hard right now because of COVID and everything. But I would say that especially before it starts raining, we can be meeting with people, groups up to 10 people. So for my needs assessment, I was just doing one-on-one, or maybe interviewing a husband and a wife, or, a husband and their, daughter or something like that. So I was never meeting with more than maybe 2 to 3 people. And right now we can still do that, especially if we're outside, wearing masks, socially distancing. So I think there's still an opportunity, even in this very strange time, to do these in-person meetings. And I think they're incredibly valuable. And so I identified 2 different sets of clientele. One set is the ranchers in my area, and the other, and kind of people associated with the ranching industry. And then the second group of clientele is agency managers, natural resources agency managers. So I interviewed 28 ranchers and 13 agency staff. And basically I had I'll go into how I developed the questions a little bit. So I created a survey, like I said, based on Fadzai's needs assessment, and then I added some of my own. My supervisor really strongly recommended to me that I tie my needs assessment to the strategic initiatives. And so she really suggested that I have several questions in my needs assessment related to the strategic initiatives. So what I did was I basically asked people to rank the importance of each of the different strategic initiatives. And then within each strategic initiative, I had them rank the different research areas within each strategic initiative. And so there were these very, some very detailed questions like that. And then some questions more about like, what kind of operation do you have? Are you cow calf? Or are you stocker? General questions like that. How would you like to receive information? Do you prefer hard copy newsletters or, online newsletters? So the questions really kind of varied. And I guess one thing I would say, lesson learned was, like we've been already discussing on this call, have your questions vetted by multiple other people. I wish I had done that more than I did. Have Vikram take a look at the questions, have somebody suggested already, have your clientele, a couple of key clientele look at the questions and make sure that they are really readable. And, basically you don't want to come across as a government bureaucrat with your a clipboard and pen and, so just be, I think, lesson learned for me was just try to make it more approachable. So next slide, please. So the next question or one of the questions that Catherine asked was, how you use the information to develop your program. So here are some of the results from my needs assessment. This is just from the rancher interviews. And basically, you can see these are sort of on the graph, these are the top things that came out. There were some other identified topics as well, but these were the ones that, multiple ranchers were really interested in. And so I kind of identified what those were. And then initially I did a bunch of workshops and I tried to incorporate, I did workshops either entirely on one of these topics. For example, weeds was, number 3. And an interesting thing I learned was that both ranchers and agency people were really interested and concerned about weeds. And so, I'm now the chair of our local weed management area, and I put together a big weed meeting every year that gets over 100 people. And so, there's that workshop that I do every year that's specific to weeds. I've done workshops that cover almost all of these topics. And so that's kind of how I started. I did actually create a research project related to tumbleweed control. So again, related to weeds. Another thing I did, so what is it? Vertebrate pests and predators is kind of there in the middle. And so ground squirrels are considered a pest by ranchers. And so I started a research project with Roger Baldwin and some other advisors looking at the economic impacts of ground squirrels to the ranching community. Well, interestingly, so ground squirrels are considered a pest by ranchers, but they're really considered important wildlife by my agency clientele. So one of the agencies that I work with heard about the ground squirrel study that I was doing related to rancher economics, and they wanted me to use the same methodology to look at, well, how can we increase ground squirrels on our property? So it's, getting it at wildlife, habitat issues, which also came up on the needs assessment, and also vertebrate pests. So that was pretty interesting. So I've been able to work on several of these different kinds of topics, either through workshops and research projects as well. Next slide, or actually we can, yeah, that's fine. I'm not quite there, that's okay. In terms of lessons learned, I think I already touched on that, making the language really understandable, asking for help developing the questions. And one thing that I did not do was really set up the needs assessment as a tool that I could then use to publish. That just wasn't even on my radar at the time I started it. But now I would definitely consider that. So I think thinking about when you start doing your needs assessment, thinking about it in terms of, can I use this, needs assessment as something that can be published, because that sort of increases the value of the time that you put into it. It can help guide your program, but then you can also get a publication out of it. And I wish I had done that. And Fadzai and I have been talking about trying to publish, but it's been several years now, and I'm not sure if it's still, I don't know if it's relevant enough, or maybe it would be, and we can talk about, we did this needs assessment and look at our programs now and then relate it back to our needs assessment. So then maybe there's a different kind of paper we can get out of it. And Fadzai and I are still sort of in communication about that. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. You already went to that slide. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is another question that Catherine had asked was, how do you keep abreast of changing needs? And so I wanted to talk about another needs assessment that we did. I'm working with Julie Finzel and Rebecca Ozeran, and the three of us are really interested in research related to oaks and oak woodland and oak mortality, especially during these droughts. And we were all excited about starting a project. And then we started talking about, well, this is what we want to know, but if we do this research, is this going to be relevant to our clientele? Are we just answering a question that we're curious about? And so we decided to do a needs assessment, and I sent, it was just a online survey, and I sent it out on my blog, and Julie and Rebecca also sent it out on their blogs and newsletters. And I think we got around 50 or 60 people who filled it out. And it really helped us kind of see, well, what are people and we sent it out to ranchers and agencies, and what are those guys really interested in? And I did a blog, you can see here, a blog post on sort of the results of that needs assessment. And then one of our NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, folks saw this article and was like, well, we really are interested in some of this stuff and we want to work with you guys. And so we were starting to develop this potential collaboration of, well, let's develop, this specific research project that would help them answer a big question that they have. And then COVID happened, and we had just started developing. I'm also the Oak Woodlands Work Group co-chair. And so we had been starting to develop a meeting for that work group, and we were gonna, talk about the results of this study, and we were gonna have the NRCS person. And so we had all these plans that got shut down with COVID. But I think that is to say that even though that NRCS person didn't fill out the survey for the needs assessment, when they saw the results, they kind of chimed in, and that led to an opportunity that we haven't been able to really jump on yet, but I think we will be able to when things get back to normal a little bit. I've also done prescribed burning is something that has been coming up a lot, and I already mentioned that every year I work on a weed meeting. I organize a weed meeting, and at the end of every year at the end of that meeting, I do an evaluation. And a few years ago, I started asking the question, are you interested in prescribed burning? If you are, what aspects are you interested in? I just asked a few questions related to prescribed burning. We had a couple of talks related to prescribed burning, actually 2 years in a row. And so I wasn't even thinking of that as a needs assessment, but really it informed me, like, who was interested, what did they want to do? I started an email list. Then we actually did a prescribed burn with the help of Lania and Jeff Stackhouse up in Humboldt County. And at the end of that prescribed burn workshop we did, I said, hey, now you've done this prescribed burn now, should I apply for a CAL FIRE grant to potentially get a prescribed burn association going down here? And the feedback that I got from that evaluation was, yes, do that. So it's sort of like 3 years in a row at meetings, I was asking for feedback, and what that led to was me then applying for a CAL FIRE grant, which I then got, and we're now moving forward on developing that prescribed burn association. So I think there's different ways that I wasn't even thinking of that as being a needs assessment, but now talking to you guys, I'm like, oh, it really was. It was just these little piecemeal over 3 years asking similar kinds of questions, but kind of more detailed each time, led to that. And one last thing I want to say is that it's not necessarily like a formal needs assessment that can really help inform your program. I think it's just paying attention to your clientele can really be helpful. A rancher, sort of an influential rancher in my area, sent out an email to a whole bunch of people, to other ranchers, some elected officials, and somehow he put me on the list. And he asked the question, like, when is someone gonna do some research and write a paper about the influence of livestock grazing on fine fuels reduction? This is really important. Our state's on fire. Why is no one looking into this? And someone else on the email said, well, you see, cooperative extension should do that. And I was like, that's me. And so, and then somebody else said, well, there's this new funding source, maybe there's an opportunity there. So I ended up applying for a grant to look at that question, and we got the grant and we just finished it and we submitted a publication for a peer review. So that was just based on paying attention to, an influential rancher clientele in my area. So even something as simple as that can really help guide your program to areas that, to do projects that are really timely, for example, for that one. And then the last question that Catherine asked was, how do you sort of tie that back into your PR? And so in my PR, I always talk about, I did this needs assessment, here's, the results of it, and here's what I've done that relates back to that needs assessment. This showing how has my program basically kind of followed suit based on my needs assessment.
Davey, thanks for sharing your examples. I think you have a few more than you've shared in the past, and it's a really good illustration of how to approach this in an ongoing way that obviously benefits clientele by paying close attention to them. And then also you've got these new cool projects and grants out of it. So thanks so much. We want to open it up for questions for Davey. I will give it another minute. We will take questions after Betsy's example too, if you guys are still thinking. Again, I would ask you, if you can, to unmute and turn your video on with questions. You can also, reach out to any of us after this short training with questions if they come up later. So without hearing anything, I'm going to move us along, but we will have other time for questions later, rest assured. All right, Betsy, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. By means of introduction, my name is Betsy Carley. I am a dairy advisor and county director based north of Davis in Glenn County. And I also have a role with the Climate Smart Agriculture Program. So really pleased to see some of our cohort on this call today. I am going to address today's topic with my dairy advisor hat on and talk about a formal needs assessment that I completed with my colleagues. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of what I'm planning to go over, I was going to talk about our motive, kind of our method behind our madness, how we designed our survey, how we used incentives to increase our response rate, and how we paid for it. And then was going to lay out for you all the things that we did wrong that hopefully you can avoid making the same mistakes, and then talk about our ongoing efforts. So to start with motive, we were really finding ourselves with shrinking ranks in the dairy advisors. 10 years ago, there were 6 advisors, and you can kind of do the math there. We certainly haven't increased. And right now we have 4 dairy advisors throughout the entire state. So we are a very small team and really needed to get some focus. Click next. So we really wanted to know how we could prioritize both research and extension and focus on areas to collaborate on. And then probably one of our biggest questions was, how do we get our information out to our clientele? We were seeing fewer and fewer dairy producers show up to meetings. If you want to click next, I think, Catherine, thanks. And really, we can't lie. It was pretty selfish. All you advisors on this training are pretty familiar with our merit and promotion process. And, a very big part of extension traditionally has been extension meetings and workshops and field days. And we really weren't, especially with only 4 of us throughout the state, we really weren't pulling big numbers into meetings. There are some programs that, you guys have fantastic big meetings, and it's a great way to extend your information. And we were just finding that wasn't the case. So we really needed to figure out what folks wanted and how we could communicate that through the merit and promotion process if we might be delivering our extension program in a little bit different way. So we did a traditional mail out survey. We sent a letter. I think there's a little bit more, Catherine, if you want to click next on this slide. Perfect. Thank you. We sent out a letter and a one-page, two-sided survey. We worked really hard to get these questions onto one page, and we were able to do this for pretty cheaply. At the time, there were 3 of us working on this, and we used startup funds, professional development funds, and our conference account. And we're able to do this for less than $3,000, and $1,000 of that was incentives. We told the first 100 respondents that they would get a $10 Starbucks gift card because we were very sensitive to survey fatigue that is very prevalent, I think, amongst all programs, and knew that we kind of needed to give folks a little bit of a bonus to be able to convince them to check our boxes. We did try to make it really easy. Circle a number, check a box. Don't have to write a whole lot. And so that we really could encourage people to just take a short amount of time to help us get some information. Next. So one other actually thing on the methods that I forgot to mention, when we designed our questions, we knew, all of us knew for sure, if you talk to a dairy farmer and say, what's most important to you? What's the biggest problem? What's your biggest concern? What's your biggest obstacle? Any of those things, they would all say milk price. So we had to really focus on asking the questions that they wanted to answer while getting the answers that we wanted to know, that the questions we wanted answers to. So unfortunately, this was before Vikram's time, because he probably could have helped us do that better than we did. But we really did make a commitment to make the very first opportunity for them to say that milk price was the highest, biggest concern, biggest obstacle, all those sorts of things, because we just felt like they were gonna look at this survey and say, forget it. If you guys don't have any idea that milk price is the most important thing, then I don't have any time for you. So we really did want to kind of get that out of the way. We were able to do pretty well on, of course my phone rings in the middle of this, on our responses. So we did get 166 responses for over 15% response rate, and we're really pleased that our responses were very representative of the dairy industry throughout the state. We don't measure in acres, we measure in number of milking cows, and we hit right at average. So that was fantastic, but had a really nice range because it is a very diverse industry. We were really wanting to focus on dairy owners and managers, and did successfully get that target audience, and had some great responses from employees and allied industry as well. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we learned that these folks are reading our newsletters. They are interested in getting something in the mail or getting something in their email and reading through it. Not so interested in meetings. We already knew that, but this really gave us a tangible example of, yeah, we can reach some people that way. We're not going to write off that extension method at all, but we did need to evaluate how we were going to do those. We had kind of trialed a more of a destination type meeting. We went to the Central Coast and tried to do a 2-day thing, and our audience did very clearly tell us, no thanks, we'd rather do a half a day or read about your research. So definitely can take that into consideration. And then I wanted to really just connect this to the merit and promotion process. This is probably most familiar to those advisors who are on the training, but I just wanted to lay it out here, and this is how I do it. My 2 themes are animal health and management, and productivity, efficiency, and sustainability of animal agriculture, including associated croplands. It's a mouthful, but this does give me the opportunity to say, under my first theme, herd health was identified as the highest ranking research and extension need for dairy producers in our formal needs assessment. So I have that information. I can put it right there in my PR so that the reviewers know that there's a reason I'm doing this kind of research, and it's because we identified that need. And then in the other theme, environmental issues were ranked as a high priority for both research and education opportunities in our formal needs assessment. Next slide. So tips, don't forget IRB. That was a fantastic discussion that we had on that already. So yeah, we almost weren't able to publish because we did not go through the process the proper way and had to do some backtracking. Do think about how the results will be presented when you're formulating questions. As I mentioned, you know, we really had to have that question in there about milk price to appeal to our clientele, but then it made it hard to compare that question to the other results. You know, I can't fix milk price. I'm not a policymaker. And there are lots of other production issues that we need to focus on. So, you know, that did make some comparisons hard. Doing a test run, if possible, as was mentioned, is also a fantastic idea. We would have changed a few things if we had gone through it and seen how some of the questions worked. And then since we used incentives, we had some reimbursement issues. I went out and bought $500 of gift cards, which was over the $499 limit for reimbursement. So I had to do some extra paperwork on that end and make our friends at the Business Operations Center not very happy with me. So do keep that in mind if you do use incentives. But you know, I would say it was worth it because I don't think we would have got the response rate that we did if we didn't have that incentive. And then I really want to focus on kind of the ongoing nature of a needs assessment. Really, these things are never done. Things are always changing. I think we all know that. And the way I articulate this in my PR is I say my research and extension program is guided by clientele needs. As a resident of the community I work in, needs assessment is a constant, if often informal effort. My program is also guided by the formal needs assessment that I completed with colleagues where we surveyed dairy producers about their research and extension priorities and evaluated their preferred methods for receiving information. So we've talked a lot about formal needs assessment, and it's been mentioned several times that informal methods are also very important. I can't remember what I have next. Oh, right. So this was kind of an informal effort that I had. I am not a fire researcher. You know, yeah, talk to me about cows or water quality or something like that, not fire. But I was actually out on a farm. I'll let you read what, this is again, verbiage from my PR. I was taking blood samples for an animal health project, and the dairyman kind of rolls in on his side-by-side and says, "Hey, can you believe this smoke and this ash? Did you see the corn when you drove in? It looks like it's got snow on it." It's like, I'm chopping in like 3 weeks. What am I supposed to do? And I had no idea how to answer him. Talked to my agronomy advisor. It's probably fine, but I don't know. So ultimately we asked enough people who said, well, we really don't know, that we threw together a grant and got some funding and started sampling to try to figure out the answer to this question. So never did I think when I was looking at failure of passive transfer of colostrum that I was going to end up doing a wildfire ash research project, but actually it's been really, really good information to have. And this was in 2018. And I can tell you, I've shared that information more this year than I ever thought I would. So, you know, I can't emphasize enough, just listening and being aware of what's going on around you programs can pivot in amazing ways, I think, as we all know. So don't write off those kind of informal and ongoing needs assessments.
Thank you so much.
I know we're a little bit behind time, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Any questions at this time for Betsy? All right, well, I'll go ahead and move along. We're going to transition into our small group discussion, as I mentioned earlier. Clint, I think you're going to go ahead and put these questions in the chat. So when all of you get into your breakout room, you will see what we're hoping for you to discuss with your peers in your program area. This is a time for you to share what you're thinking about for your approach, whether you're just beginning or you're in the middle or you're done some and you're thinking about what you're going to do next. You know, what data collection methods, what mixed methods are you thinking about using and why? And how are you thinking that you're going to use your results? So again, this is time for you to get feedback from your peers. We will all of our presenters will be in your breakout rooms. Vikram and I are going to be popping between two, given the number of breakout rooms, but Betsy, Stephen, and Davey will be sticking with a couple of the groups. So with that, I'm going to just give a little more logistical information. You'll have 20 minutes in your breakout room. You will automatically rejoin the main room. We will give you, thanks, Clint is going to give you a couple warnings so you're not startled, because you do get yanked back in the main room sometimes without tons of notice. There is on the bottom ask for help button. There is a presenter coming to each room, so hopefully you can just ask us if you need it. But again, if you need to ask for help, go ahead and do that. With that, Clint, I think we will wait to go into our breakout rooms. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for folks that might have bandwidth issues. So we will get you there, don't worry. All right, welcome back. I hope you all had a good conversation in your breakout room. I know I really enjoyed mine. We just have a few minutes left. I wanted to go ahead and do a real short report out here. I invite you to put into the chat what your next step for your needs assessment is. So if you could go ahead and put in the chat, what's your next step? I know we spent some time in our rooms talking about sometimes it's just good to articulate, okay, tomorrow, maybe not tomorrow, but my next step is X, Y, or Z. We really try to design these programs to be as practical as possible. We wish you could leave with a full needs assessment plan that we're usually able to spend a little more time working on in our all-day training. So the short of the long here is just put it out there what your next step is. Thank you, Cindy. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us along. Keep thinking about where your next step is. Vikram and I and the presenters are interested to hear what that is. Here's the bibliography. We will post our slides on our webpage. Thanks to Vikram for updating this for us. Again, this year, all the references from what we shared. A few key resources. We have our own needs assessment page. And I know in talking with Cindy in my room, we don't have any great IPM example of survey questions. So we're going to see what we can come up with. But there are a lot of program examples there and other resources. Vikram also wanted to highlight this North Carolina extension page, has a lot of good needs assessment resources. Mark Bell put together some resources on the learning and development page. We highlighted down here, thanks to Stephen Worker. I know folks in youth and community development often take that asset-based approach that we briefly talked about in the beginning. If that was of interest to you, here's a couple great resources to pursue that approach. With that, we wanted to make sure we've got about 5 minutes left, and to increase our response rate, we'd like to give you time now to respond to our survey link. Thanks, Julia. There's a link in the chat to our short evaluation survey for this training. As always, it's critical for us to know what worked well. It's new in this shorter online format, and we're going to be doing this as the first of an 8-part series. So we desperately appeal to you to respond to our evaluation survey so we can improve the rest of our trainings as we move through this series. With that, I will stop talking and give you a second to do the evaluation. Again, it's in the chat. Vikram, any final thoughts from you?
I was looking for the needs assessment, like bibliography link. I'll post it, and it's one of the resources that's there.
Do you want me to go back to?
Yeah. So this is the fourth one is something
yes.
that we developed this year. I'm a part of the Western Regional Evaluation Network team. So it has like examples of needs assessments from other states and also the different methods that were used. And this was peer reviewed extension publication. So the link there should.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, one more time maybe. Yeah. So you can check it when you have some time.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Vikram.
that's what I wanted to share.
And we will post that as well on our page. With just a couple minutes left, giving folks a few minutes to do the eval, but I would invite our panelists, any final thoughts or ahas that came out of discussion in your room? Any final words of wisdom?
No, I would just say thank you to Catherine and your group and PSU for making this work in this format. This is a really valuable training that I think is incredibly beneficial to people across A&R. So not an easy one to deliver virtually, and really, really appreciate all of your efforts.
Thanks so much, Betsy. And again, the panel is always one of our favorite parts of our training. I know the next training is Kit's training. Kit, do you want to give a quick pitch to the next training in the series?
Sure. The next training is a defining clientele and affirmative action planning training that is specifically geared to CE advisors and other academics who go through the A&R merit and promotion process. We changed the targeted audience because it really is kind of focused around project board requirements. So we know that other folks have to do, defining clientele, baseline, and affirmative action work. But, if it's done on campus or done through other statewide programs, we're really not kind of covering that part as much. So yeah, we have a lot of great examples from advisors and others talking about how to get baseline for their clientele groups, how they define their baseline, and yeah, how they kind of measure their progress. So looking forward to that training next week.
Thanks, Kit. We're at time. Clint is managing this for us as host. Can you save the chat for us so we can take a look at that later? And just want to thank everybody for joining us. We hope to see you at another training if it was of interest to you, and reach out to us with any final questions when they come up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.